Hi, this is Anthony from Make Weird Music, and I'm here with Andy West from the Dixie Dregs, Flap, Crazy Backwards Alphabet, all manners of
The
bands.
Mistakes.
The Mistakes.
Yeah.
Yes. Indeed.
It's been many years, but
Yeah.
might as well count it.
Yeah. So yeah, I wanted to kind of get some background on your musical history and then how you have gotten into the bands you were in, what prompted you to get out of the music industry, and kind of get a sense of your compositional method, if you have one.
Okay.
So why don't we start with your background? Like, how did you get started with music?
Okay, so, first off, I appreciate you asking me to do this. I think it's an interesting idea. I looked at the website and I see you're evolving it, putting more and more stuff there.
Thank you.
I think we have to talk about the context of weird music just for a minute here, because there's a couple of avenues here. There's the experience of it, right? The learning of it, the hearing of it, the attraction to it, those kind of things.
Right.
And then there's the kind of performance and composition aspects of it, right? So you have to start with, why would anyone be interested in this stuff at all? You know? And I haven't got a clue. I don't know why. All I know is that for anyone who is interested in unusual music or weird music or whatever we want to call it, and we can talk about some of these definitions, there's always some kind of pivotal thing that you hear about in their background that said, yeah, it was really weird, this happened, and I was exposed to this, and then it was like never been the same, right?
Right.
And so I've had a couple of those things. They're many years ago, right? But I remember when I was in high school, I went over to a friend of mine's house to play pool because he had a pool table. But for some reason, this was like in the 7th grade or something, and the music he was playing was Sun Ra.
Oh, wow.
Terry Riley in C.
I don't know Terry Riley.
Oh my God, okay. This is really old stuff, but it's very sort of avant-garde. And then a Ravi Shankar and Yehudi Menuhin East Meets West album, and Harry Partch. So this guy had a really broad, I don't know, I think his parents somehow, right? Who knows how or why, but I just remember this music striking me, and of course I remember all these things. And the thing back then was, wow, what is this? It's so different than everything else. So there was kind of that, right? That was just an exposure. The other thing was being in Atlanta, and oddly enough, Atlanta had really weird bands, primarily the Hampton Grease Band. So have you ever heard them?
No.
Oh my goodness, okay. Well, I brought this. This is the Music to Eat album by Hampton Grease Band.
Cool.
So you can listen to this after we leave and finish this, but this came out in the 60s, and it's notoriously the worst selling album that Columbia ever released. But this album is, so Bruce Hampton is the guy who started the Hampton Grease Band, and Glenn Phillips is the guitar player in the band, and there's a lot of people that are he's kind of like the Miles Davis of Atlanta weird music. So all these people would come through his band and continue to this day. So Bruce,
he's still around.
Yeah, Bruce is a very interesting guy, and he's always attracted the most incredible musicians. And this is something that you'll really enjoy.
Cool. All right.
There's also so there's those kind of things, right? And then and this is another one. The Hampton Grease Band turned into Colonel Bruce Hampton, and this is just one of probably a half dozen albums he did around that time. One, Ruined Life of a Bronze Tourist. So there's all kinds of just very interesting, weird stuff on here.
All right. Would you liken his music to anyone else?
It's like, I'd have to say no.
Okay, cool.
I also can't explain why this band was so popular in Atlanta. Because when you hear the music, you'll ask the same question. But when I lived in Atlanta and I was in high school, for example, I saw there was a place, the sports arena, which is where they had wrestling matches, but they also had concerts. So, like the day before I moved to Augusta, when I was in the 11th grade or 10th grade, I was 16, and the day before I moved there, I saw the Hampton Grease Band and Fleetwood Mac playing. And Fleetwood Mac was the old Fleetwood Mac, the bluesy kind of oh well Fleetwood Mac, you know. And so that was kind of interesting. There's also, for me, so there was all those avenues which led to different kinds of things. You know, and again, I don't want to go on and on. I could go on, you know, to explain a life history of a human being who's listened to music his whole life, right, is a long thing. I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that there's always ways and events that kind of link music to people's times in their lives that is interesting. Yeah. You know, and that has these weird things, and then you know, you draw on that actually forever, I think, to some degree.
Absolutely, yeah. And for me, the purpose of the website is to help others just discover strange music. Not strange like you wouldn't want to listen to it, but you probably wouldn't have found it unless somebody told you about it. Like it wouldn't be something that's heard on the radio or necessarily shared by your friends unless you have friends who like weird music. But I want the site to inspire people to, even if they write straightforward songs, do something to make it a little interesting for the listener, you know. And it's cool to hear your background in weird music and to hear artists that you've discovered too. So I look forward to hearing those.
Yeah, there's a list, and I have some in my phone to remind me to talk about these things. It's you know, what's interesting about now versus then is it took a lot of effort to pursue music back then. There wasn't this instant gratification of, oh, let's just go find, you know, 25 different amazingly weird things, right? We can do that in you know, as long as it takes to click. You'd have to track this stuff down. You'd have to have people who had collections of this stuff. You'd have to, you know, you'd be invested in it. Okay, let's listen to this. It wasn't like, let's listen to 10 seconds of this, then 10 seconds of that. Then, you know, so there's a, but, you know, this isn't really about sort of like the badness of today versus yesterday. It's just a different kind of thing. It's like some people read books and some people don't. They just want, you know, the 5-second, you know, soundbite, the list of headlines. You know, I want to see the Twitter feed. That's, you know, I mean, I was listening to this woman from work today on a little video cast on a work website. Right, used to be there, and she was like, "Here's why I like social media." And then she was talking, you know, I'm reminded of the Frank Zappa interview where the Ted Koppel says, "You're obviously a very intelligent man, Mr. Zappa." You know, left-handed compliment if there ever was one. She's obviously very intelligent, but she said, "I use Twitter as my news feed." You know, and I'm like, "Oh, okay, you get all your news through Twitter." How interesting!
You follow the people you choose.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's like as if that's okay. I you know, for me, it's not. Right. So.
Kind of curates your own bubble.
At the same time, I totally understand it. Right. You know, obviously, this person has found something they're comfortable with, you know, hearing, or seeing or whatever. So. So anyways, there's, you know, this is, I was thinking about this, and there's lots of stories to tell that are probably really boring because who cares, you know, at some point. But, you know, maybe you want to have on your site just a link to every kind of thing, you know, because literally it's all out there. I mean, you can find out the whole history of the Hampton Grease Band if you do a search, you know, right now. You know, and for me, there's like a lot of these things. So that was kind of where I fell into this. I mean, I started as a musician, just like many people, just kind of from a rock and roll perspective of popular music. I mean, the Beatles were the thing, you know, and then in the 60s, then it became, you know, Hendrix and the Jefferson Airplane and all that stuff. And, you know, I was just attracted to it, you know, for whatever reason, and the counterculture, you know. I remember the the principal at our school would come by and he'd go, "My little hippies, what are you guys doing?" And this kind of stuff.
That's interesting. I bet there's a whole other way of thinking that you probably have living through that era. For me, my dad had the records. I didn't know that it was counterculture or different or anything.
Right.
For me, he was in this band. We would go listen. I would hear him rehearse with this band, and they would play Jethro Tull, Genesis, Van der Graaf Generator, that kind of stuff. I didn't know that it wasn't normal. My mom just listened to different music. I just tended to not like that as much.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's an explanation.
I honestly don't think there is. I think that there's just kind of something inside people that kind of draws out their curiosity in different ways. Some people are really attracted to understanding sports and team sports and individuals, all this kind of stuff, right? Some people are really, as I said, attracted to books. They like really hard to, follow challenging things. Others like these really breezy stories that will just hold their attention until they stop, It's inexplicable to me.
Yeah. Cool.
But if you never are exposed to this stuff or even think about it, you might never, you might miss something. Although sometimes I wonder about that too. It's kind of like, well, maybe everything is exactly as it should be.
Well, I think it reminds me of that Zappa quote, how music without any sort of weird notes or something like that is like watching a movie with no antagonist or eating cottage cheese, is what he says. But yeah, you should be challenged. And
well, okay, so how challenged?
Well, that I don't know. It's especially if you listen to music for entertainment.
Yeah.
Should you really be challenged by your entertainment? I don't know. I
don't know either, but you can find beauty in different things. So for me, I mentioned the experience in high school, and then when I moved to Augusta, Georgia is when I met Steve Morse, and we started the Dregs and all this kind of stuff. And that was just, there's lots of stuff on the internet about the Dregs, and it's easy to find, but it's kind of like, the simple story is that Steve was a very sort of unique composer and guitar player who practiced all the time, like many of these guys who are great do, right? They just sort of, for some reason, that's what he did, and he started to pull things out of the air that were things that the rest of us couldn't imagine. So we followed, and it was great, Did you
guys meet? Was it in high school?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, concurrent to that kind of experience, so what was interesting was the Dregs took on the persona of Steve's music, and but even concurrent to that, for me, I was exploring all these different things, and coming from Atlanta, I had the Hampton Grease Band and all these other things. I brought this Bartok String Quartets album because when I was in college, this was the stuff that just got to me. When I don't remember how I first heard it, but when I did, I was like, "What is this?"
Yeah.
It was, it was not like, it wasn't like tweaky, like something that you've never seen before, and you're just like, how bizarre is this weird geometric thing? It was like this really wonderful, beautiful thing that I couldn't imagine how it happened.
Yeah.
I couldn't really see the path from what I knew to that. It was again inexplicable. Whereas if you listen to the more classical, Bach, Beethoven, you can hear these threads, right? And you can feel a different kind of thing. This to me was a little bit inexplicable. Years later, I kind of started to understand, his, like the folk music connection and his own way of thinking, and I read about how he thought about this stuff and what he did, and learned a little bit more about it. But I'm definitely not a music scholar or anything like that. I just listen and like this stuff. So that was something that really, really got to me as well, was finding this kind of modern, advanced kind of classical music, and then going back in time to Schoenberg and then Stravinsky and all that kind of like more angular, radical stuff. And the other thing is, I just wonder, now kind of from a vantage point of history and consumption, having a lifetime of consumption of this stuff. And you say, for example, no, I never even heard of the Hampton Crease Band. It's like, wow, I'm so surprised considering, how much I have found out that you do know about that old stuff. You know? Part of me goes like, how important is it? Probably not very.
There's sentiment and importance, and it's hard to tell the difference sometimes.
Yeah. Well, this is another thing. Is like I try and understand what is the value of currency, meaning current now.
Right.
Like how important is it right now that people are doing something that kind of in a way has already been done, but if it's now, it's different.
Right.
I don't know. Have you thought about that?
I have a bit, especially with these remixes of these old albums, where Steven Wilson, in particular, has been remixing King Crimson, Jethro Tull, done Emerson, Lake and Palmer, or something like that. Anyway, just listening to these albums as remixes, it makes it almost sound like new music, because they clean up the vocals. It doesn't sound like 1970s tape with 1970s mastering.
Right.
The drums have pillows stuffed in them. It sounds more like modern music, and I wonder, when I hear it, I pop in Gentle Giant, Power and the Glory on Blu-ray.
Right.
It feels new. I know the music very well. And then I think, man, this is to me, even more non-standard, out of left field. If it was released today, who knows if they could have gotten anywhere with it.
Well, there's been so many notes played, and there's so many words written, and there's so many movies made. I just kind of like it's like a big massive stream, and you wonder kind of what is going to continue to pop out or matter, and it's just curious to me. I don't really have a strong opinion on it, because no matter what I think or do, stuff is going to happen, and people are going to pursue weird stuff.
Absolutely.
You're going to write the Moby Dick album.
Yeah. Right.
No matter, like somehow, some way that happened.
Right.
Absolutely. And I think it's all good. But I do think that for people that want to pursue it, it's interesting to kind of, again, tug on a thread. So we started the band, then we had a little bit of a hiatus, and then we sort of came back together into the more modern band after Steve had gone to University of Miami. And I want to bring that up because when I went down there, that was when I started to get exposed to jazz, right? I had no idea, jazz. I mean, it didn't mean anything to me, right? So, for example, in the University of Miami, when I first walked into the main room where we would have small group rehearsal or larger classes and this kind of thing, there was a picture of Coltrane on the wall, and I was like, who's that? They looked at me like I was nuts, right? But the interesting thing about that is, for me, in the 90s, somehow I started listening again to Miles Davis and then Coltrane, and then I went backwards through that whole catalog and consumed it, and I was like, oh my God, this is just, talk about weird music. I mean, if you really put yourself in the time when that music was made,
right?
How could it be? How did it even happen?
I totally get that. I'll listen to The Residents, and I wonder, how did that happen? Like, what's that song? Hello, Skinny.
Mm-hmm.
What possessed anyone to do that, whether it was then or now, just to tell this very strange story?
I don't remember the song exactly.
goes skinny, was born in a bathtub and grew so incredibly thin that even the end of an eyedropper sucked him in. And like the lyrics are so strange, and there's this terrifying black and white video, and they melded the art with the music into this very strange product, and it's almost timeless. Like you couldn't tell if somebody made it last year or 30, 40 years ago. And I wonder about that, like these anomalous music products. How did they come out of nowhere? The brain that made them ended up making all this other stuff, and it just becomes a part of their portfolio. But for me, it's kind of like a milestone. Right. And it's fun for me to think about how we interpret the work of other people, and how artists generally hate what they've done and they move on. And like my friend Carl King, he doesn't want to make music ever again. And I just think, what a shame. He's such a great talent. But for him, he hated the way his music was going.
Well, it's about living a life. I mean, it's not about like
entertaining others.
And I don't know, the idea of this, you actually mentioned a couple things, and I want to pull these out because I didn't want to forget about these things. I had the residents on here as one of the topics, just because they're just, it's a crazy thing. Yeah. I mean, even like Devo, right? I mean, that was they were very weird.
Yeah. Yeah. Mark Mothersbaugh, I don't know if he would have made it as a musician were he not in Devo, but he's still doing lots of interesting new stuff. Right. Those guys, it's a passion for them. They probably would continue to do it if they were destitute, but
But even things like Chick Corea and Keith Jarrett. The first time I heard Chick Corea was from exposure at the University of Miami, where like there are all these things. But I remember the album. It was he did an album of solo improvisations, and it was so striking to me. It was like that Bartok thing. It was like, wow, where is this even coming from? I don't understand this. I don't understand what this is, but I really like it. I it's not like noise to me. Right. And so but that took a lot of facility. I mean, you can't just, that wasn't like a folky thing,
Yeah, and how do they prepare themselves to do that? And do they think it's that outlandish? And as musician yourself, maybe you've produced something like that where somebody goes, "What the heck was that about? How did you do that?" And you have a very layman explanation for it. That's probably not that interesting to you.
Well, just to kind of go down the path of creating music that's not normal, right? I think the first thing there is you're kind of doing it for yourself. For some reason you find this really interesting, and you really hope that others do. Yeah. But it's not a criteria. Right. It's not it's not a motivator. What's motivating is where did this come from? That it kind of fell out of my fingers, or maybe it was a sound that I like and I wanted to repeat. It's really easy to do weird stuff now. Again, when I started on this, it's like I didn't have the capacity to hear everything in my head. Steve is like that. Many musicians are like that. That for somehow, it's just in there, and it's just kind of like getting facility to pull it out. I'm more kind of like tugging on things and finding seeing what I find there. So for me, it was when we first had 4-track tape recorders. Getting that TX, the 3340, was the first one that changed everything, right? Where suddenly people could have multi-tracking in their home. Yeah. How crazy is that, right?
I recorded stuff when I was like 15 years old on that machine. Yeah. The 1/4-inch 4-track.
It's awesome. And I learned a lot about writing doing that too, because I would figure out, okay, here's a little pattern. And during this time, Steve would write things occasionally in odd times. The other thing that happened was there was a distinct kind of shift in his skills. When we were in high school, we wrote sort of more rock-oriented things, and we played this kind of stuff. And then he went to University of Miami and got exposed to jazz, and the Mahavishnu Orchestra was out right at that time, and all that kind of stuff happened. So Mahavishnu was one of these things where it's like, okay, if we're going to learn any of this stuff, which we did, we were like a Mahavishnu cover band. So they were really weird because they were always doing these things in odd times, and so everything was about counting. So when you're young and you're just learning, and anyone can feel 4/4, 3/4, these kind of things. But when you start to break it down and you have these choppy combination rhythms,
fragments.
Yeah, 7/8 and 5/8 makes 12, kind of, But so for us, just learning those songs really pulled out the weird rhythms,
right?
And just that became a whole fascination for me. It was interesting hearing the thing that Carl was talking about, where I just listened to it because I was trying to catch up on that thing, and I remember this having a similar kind of thing. It wasn't as advanced as he was thinking about rhythms and
the borrowed
rhythms and stuff like this. For me, it was just like, polyrhythms, like 3 against 4. How do you break that down? And then starting to count and tapping it out, and,
right.
And exploring that whole thing. Nowadays, it's totally easy in a sequencer to figure,
right.
to hear that stuff, put it in,
right.
kind of play around with it. And for me, when I like to write, that's kind of what I do. I'll pull something out of the bass or the guitar, or maybe a synth sound, and then if it has a feeling, because I like odd rhythms, but it's not a requirement.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But if it has that, it's easy to put in, and then you can listen to it and start to, maybe I should have a bass line here, or maybe this should have something floaty here, or maybe a weird sound, that kind of stuff.
So do you, this might be getting ahead of us, but
yeah.
Is that how you construct things? Is it kind of piecemeal based on what you're hearing at the time, like construction set kind of thing? Like,
yeah, I would say so. I don't think of songs in total. I do think very traditionally in some ways about sections. I like to have a song go from somewhere to somewhere, with repeated sections and this kind of stuff, and typical forms, in a lot of ways, but build them up, really build them up from something that runs through, if it's a rhythmic pattern or a chordal pattern or a bass line, right. And then just start to layer on. So it really is constructing and building up. That's how I do it.
Before computers were a major part of the music industry,
right?
Were you doing everything? Were you writing it out? Were you working just by ear with other people, or just by yourself and recording to tape?
Yeah, mainly by ear. Not a lot of written stuff unless I needed to for some reason, or I was trying to remember something. I do have a lot of old pieces of paper, music paper with like lines on them. When I would write something, if I didn't have a tape deck, I'd play it, write it down, and so I wouldn't forget it. But really, even from as long as I can remember, it was really kind of capturing ideas on tape and then going back to them. Yeah.
Do you feel like the things you grew up listening to, or the eras of like when you discovered Coltrane and Miles Davis, do those things fill maybe gaps in your musical emotional state of being, or do they motivate you in a certain direction? Do they provide influences for you? Like what does that do when you become obsessive about?
Yeah. Well, it's hard. I try and it's not so much trying. It's like I appreciate it when I'm drawn into music. I'd say it happens less now than it used to, and maybe sometimes I think about kind of re-exploring that stuff. It's not like, you hear it the first time and it's just in you.
Right.
So so that's kind of a positive thing to me. Is kind of like, someday I'll go back and revisit that and really listen to that again. And every now and again I'll do something like that. Like when I was going through that jazz thing, and I discovered, Miles and Coltrane, and then people like Bill Evans, right?
Yeah.
And everyone was, then you read all this history and how people talked about Bill Evans, and it's like, what's all this, and then kind of even almost the first time you hear his music, you're like, well, this isn't really that amazing. But then all of a sudden you're in it, and it's like, wow, what the heck? This is really special. This is really different. It's not just jazz,
Yeah.
It's something really different. I don't know how to explain it. So for me, I'd like to actually know more about that. I'd like to go in and dig in, Who
So
knows?
you find, I don't know, tactics or techniques, or maybe it makes you feel a certain way and you think, I'd like to understand that better? Or is it just like, oh, that's cool, I should try that sometime?
I think it's, I think it should be all about feeling, I think that, I remember I was thinking to myself about this the other day, kind of almost the athleticism of the music that I played, in my 20s, and kind of like just the challenging nature of, can I even execute this kind of thing, and that's kind of a cool thing, but I would much rather feel a sense of beauty, power, sadness, than like, wow, amazing.
Another guy that can play really good.
Yeah, and the other thing is the bar is raised so high. This is just kind of where you want to focus. A lot of times, I'll just spend a Saturday morning on YouTube and just go, oh my God, what's going on here? Where are these people coming from?
Right.
How did they get here? I mean, the musicianship is so astonishing. And I have a deep appreciation for that level of skill, but at the same time, you can listen to a Tom Waits song and be completely blown away.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Which is also pretty weird.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the music, like the stylization of the sound of his music,
right,
is a whole other thing to get immersed in.
So, when you think about weird music, I mean, there's all these threads.
Right.
So that's why I'm almost struggling with the term weird, because weird can be funny. Funny is good.
And I actually want it to be open. I do want it to be anything. It should just be not so predictable.
Yeah.
It should just be not so conformist. Even if it's 1/4/5.
Right.
Make it asymmetrical. Add a beat. Do something strange between the chords, Take a major, make it a minor, whatever. Just do something that's kind of like, whoa, didn't see that coming.
Right. It's funny, I was at, I can't remember when this was, but sometime I was at work, in my past 30 years or whatever, and someone found out I was a musician, this woman, and I remember talking to her. She says, "Oh yeah, I love music. I love music. Whitney Houston is my favorite." And of course I had a knee-jerk reaction to that, because while Whitney Houston as a vocalist was certainly skilled, right, proficient, I mean, the music did nothing for me, at all. And talk about formulaic, it's kind of like, okay, well, we're going to do a song that does this,
Yep. This is the curve.
Yeah. And so I was thinking, and again, it's like you want to check yourself in a certain way, right? It's not about being an elitist or this kind of thing. It's just sort of like, well, okay, I'm happy that someone appreciates music at all.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's almost kind of rare these days.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you'd hope that they would go further.
But that's the thing about weird. Sometimes the listener doesn't even have to know that you went further, you know? And you can do things in such a way that sounds perfectly normal to the big Whitney Houston fan. But in the background, you're like, I used the non-diatonic chord there, and that's what makes that cool. Or like even there's Outkast's Hey Ya. Do you know that song?
Yeah, yeah.
It's got a bar of 6 in the chorus, and that to me is like, yeah, that's cool. I like that. You know, it's this really stupid, simple song, and it's fun, totally entertaining, but there's a bar of 6 in it, and I think that's weird, and he did that, and that's cool.
Right. Well, you know,
what is normal to you? You know, to define weird, we should have a sense of normal.
Yeah. Well, you know, I am really not a fan of pop music at all. You know, I just don't appreciate it anymore. It's like I've heard it. I mean, there's amazing kind of skill, if you will, when you think about some of these singers.
Right.
You know, and it's like because of the internet and TV and everything else, the best ones are gonna, again, it's kind of like raising the bar, right? The best ones are just gonna rise up because there's, you know, the big eye is looking out for attention, you know, like, and well, who's gonna pop up? Oh, that's not quite there, not quite there, not quite there. Oh, wow, you know, it's pretty high.
And it's a whole package thing now.
It's a whole package thing.
Yeah. The look,
you know,
the stage presence.
Yeah, you know, so it's like, I don't know, I just find it really boring, you know.
So is that what not weird music is for you?
Yeah, probably.
Okay. And do you have, what does the term weird music evoke for you?
Well, you know, it's, for me, it's trying, again, I can find an emotional content in a lot of things that have kind of unusual tonalities to them or instrumentation, that kind of stuff. So if I was going to say weird, it would be just kind of that. It would be a recognition that this is not what is commonly done.
Out of conformance.
Yeah, you know, it's just, there's some aspect to it that makes it attractive and unique in that way. But I always go back to how does it actually make me feel? You know, if I feel a certain way, then I can start to dig into some analysis of what it is, maybe, you know.
And do you consider the music you've written or performed on, over 20 albums, right? Is that weird music to you?
Well, I don't think the Dregs is weird at all.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
There's you know, we have, that music has clear roots. Yes. You know, so you can sort of trace back and you can see where it's coming from, and either you appreciate that or you don't. You know, but one of the things that we did that I think is common to the kind of music that I like is we actually played it.
Yes.
You know, and we had ourselves in it. You know, it wasn't, yes, it's a performance, but we were a band in the best sense of the word, right? We knew each other, we liked each other, we lived with each other. You know, there was a lot of connections there. And I think that comes through. You know, when you see a band play and musicians are communicating, they're communicating on some kind of cerebral level, right? It's about the feeling of what's coming through the music. And that's like awesome. Yeah. You know, it's awesome when you see that. And it's so wonderful. Right. It's so different than there's the star and there's the backup players, and it's just a sound and, oh, I love this song, you know. It's not like that.
Right. That's, for me, that's interesting mostly because a lot of my music and musical influences are solo multi-instrumentalist type people who lock themselves in a studio and it's them and maybe a couple other people. There's no band. It's like, this is the product of my hands.
Yeah, yeah.
And I do love a lot of band music, but I go to see live bands to support them, and to see that music performed live.
Right.
It's cool to understand the dynamics and stuff.
Right.
But
right.
often there's a different drummer, there's a different bass player, and
right. Well, I mean, sometimes great songs are great songs,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. But that's cool. That was such a part of the experience for you with the Dixie Dregs.
Yeah, it was, and it's also what I look for when I hear other musicians play. It's like, what was it? Did I tell you about this? The MIM here is great, right?
Yeah, yeah.
They always have really interesting, and you've told me about a couple of things, but I went and saw Steve Gadd and Jimmy Johnson and some other session players, like this guy, I forgot the guitar player's name, but anyhow, he was a great guitar player. Kind of one of these guys that you wouldn't know about, but he's played on a gazillion albums. But these are all older guys, but they were just so happy to be playing. Right. And they were all masters of their instruments, and the music it wasn't weird. It was just a joy to listen to, though, right? So that was another kind of thing that you can draw on.
Yeah.
That is part of this whole music thing.
Right.
So back to the weird thing, it's sort of like, now you compare and contrast that with
Crazy backwards alphabet,
yeah,
perhaps?
Yeah, sure. Oh, so that's actually a very interesting conversation, because so I had met Henry Kaiser, who is another guy who's just, I learned so much from him, and he's like a musicologist. I mean, every time, I haven't seen Henry in many years, but I'm thinking about it now, because when I used to go over to his house, I would always just say, okay, what do you have? And just tell him, and he would pull out,
trove.
Yeah, he would just pull something out and say, here, listen to this, and just all this amazing music. And actually, I can't remember what his website is, but if you do a search for him, you can find him, and he's got a list of like 100 or more different things, each of which definitely qualifies as weird, and each of which is wonderful and amazing in its own way. So that's
on Henry Kaiser's website.
Yeah, and so I forget what it is, but there's I recently found it again. He had redone it, but those links are still there. So you'll probably want to put a link to that.
Cool, I will. Yeah.
But yeah, that was.
How did that get started? How did that band get incarnated?
Yeah, so I met Henry through this guy, Jeff Gould, who Jeff was a bass maker. He started Modulus Graphite, and
he made the current basses you have.
Yeah, and Jeff lives in San Francisco, and he made instruments for the Grateful Dead, for Phil Lesh, and he's been around for a while. But he started this whole graphite thing. And one day I was visiting him in his shop, and Henry came in and he introduced me and said, oh yeah, you guys should get to know each other. And so I got to know Henry when I lived in San Francisco, and we just kind of stayed in touch. And he's very I can't even begin to describe how he plays guitar, because it's very unusual.
Yeah, I watched a few videos and the one of your bass video.
Oh yeah,
all those years ago.
Okay.
But yeah, that was really interesting. His technique and his ideas, everything about it.
Yeah, it's so out there, and so for me, he's just a really smart guy and a really great guy to be around, and I felt like when I was just around him, I was learning stuff, and so I guess maybe that just made me very open to kind of these different approaches. And he was really into Captain Beefheart, and I never listened to anything by Captain Beefheart. And so then he was like, he had this idea to put this band together. He had met this guy, this drummer from Sweden, and just said, let's try and do something. And so it was all his idea. And but that was so. he would bring these songs in, and one of them was his Captain Beefheart song, and I think it's on one of these albums. It's and if I get the title right, I think it's a carrot is the same as a diamond to a blind horse, or something like that. You know, it's like this really weird title.
Right.
But the whole thing about playing this was that the patterns on the bass and the song itself was just so unusual and weird. But to play it, what I did was I didn't think about rhythm per se.
Right.
Right. What I learned playing with Henry was that rhythm, the Dregs was the exact opposite. Dregs was very much, here's the beat, and you're playing either, you know, just on top of it, a little behind it. I mean, you know, you learn all these things as a musician, right? Exactly where you're going to do it.
It's precisely
precision.
constructed.
Yeah, exactly. Precision. And precision can create a lot of amazing feels. You know, it's not all about being mechanical, right? But you're precisely dragging, you know, that kind of stuff, right? With Henry and these guys, it was very different. It was like, okay, we're going to start here and we're going to end here. And what happens in between is stuff. You know?
That's interesting.
Yeah. And so we would play, and it was like, at first I was like really disconcerted by this whole thing. And then, because I'm very used to playing with precision, and particularly drummers who are like super precise and great, you know, and as a bass player, it's wonderful because I don't have to think, you know, I can just play, and it's
you feel, you communicate.
You know, so with this other thing, it was really different. Then I started to have a lot of fun with it, you know, and it was like, wow, this is really cool. It's really, really different. And it was all about that kind of thing, like trying to understand rhythm from a different perspective, and the song, you know. Right. It's like I'm not playing a song like with precision. What I'm doing is I'm playing a feeling, and it starts here and ends here.
Huh.
It was really cool, and we had a great time with that. As a matter of fact, the follow-on to that is when I met Mike Keneally at a NAMM show. I didn't know who Mike was, you know, but I saw him play with Dweezil. They had this band in the early 90s, and they were doing this crazy stuff. They did...
Is that Z?
It was pre-Z.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Brian Beller was in the band, and Mike, and they were at the NAMM show, and they did this thing. They had this famous medley they did that was like about, you know, a bar and a half of like 50 or 70 songs. And it was incredible, and it just flowed like from beginning to end. So I was talking to Mike, I was, oh yeah. And he didn't mention the Dregs. He said, I really like that Crazy Backwards Alphabet album. And so that was the first conversation we had, and I was like, oh, I like this guy because he's, you know, talking about something different.
Right.
And he knew Henry, and then that was like, oh, maybe we should, you know, we've been talking about doing something, maybe this would be a catalyst, you know, so.
How did John French get involved?
Yeah, so John, you know, was the drummer in Beefheart.
Right.
And Henry.
Drumbo, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Henry, so that was the Crazy Backwards Alphabet thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so there was Drumbo and the guy from Sweden, and he tracked down Drumbo. I guess Henry knew everybody in Beefheart's band, you know, because he was just a fan, you know. And
Beefheart didn't have fans, he had fanatics.
Yeah. And, but Drumbo was, John was great. He was just, you know, we did a couple of his songs on that album, and he put out an album that I had played on, you know, that was part of that whole time. That was pretty cool. And he was just a guy living out in, you know, somewhere way out in, I forget what that valley is up north of LA.
There's a lot of
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I see it in my head, you know, you go up the 5 and you turn right and you're off in there. And it's like the desert, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And, but yeah, so he was part of that whole thing.
So logistically, how did all that work out? Were you making a living with this weird band?
Well, no. So my little part of the story is that I got to be really good as a bass player for the Dregs But I was really not a good journeyman musician. I really don't like to play other people's music if I don't really love it somehow. The thing with Henry, I mean, that was, we did a couple of gigs, and even the Mistakes did a gig or two. And but that was just so narrowly focused. There was no way to make money doing that, really. The Dregs was kind of a miracle to make money. And so when the band broke up the first time and I moved to California, I just kind of gave lessons and tried to play in different bands and really didn't find anything. And that's when I started getting into software and computers and the whole thing.
Now, what was that like for you? Was there remorse or any sort of sadness moving on? Or was it more like, this was so hard, I'm glad to find something reliable,
Well,
what was that like for you?
Yeah, this doesn't have a lot to do with weird music, but it's interesting, perhaps. I mean, for me, there was a lot of turmoil. I mean, in the sense that I really loved the band. I loved being in the band, but it got to be very difficult. We had kind of gotten to a point where we weren't getting anywhere. We had a lot of issues with the business people and this kind of stuff, and we just really worked hard. We kind of burned out a little bit. And I think Steve was ready to go to the next level, which he did, for me, it was just like, okay, what's next, and I'd always been interested in computers, so I kind of was attracted to that. When I got my first job in software, I was thrilled to get a paycheck,
Something reliable every 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, what am I going to do? I mean, I had lived the life of a musician through my 20s, and just, it was very experiential, I mean, I worked really hard to be in the band, but then a lot of it was just living life, and then I had no idea what corporate America was like. I'd heard about it.
Yeah.
I knew there was a lot of people that worked jobs,
Did you enjoy your life as a musician, or was it more about, I loved playing music and everything else was secondary?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think I was kind of a pragmatist about it all. I do love playing music, and I did, right? But I wasn't willing to go down with it, per se.
Right. Maybe Steve was.
Yeah.
Based on his desire to go to the next level or something.
Yeah, Steve was just, no, there was just a lot of issues with kind of us and our business, the fact that we kind of had done the same thing for a while, and it had just sort of stopped in a way. I mean, we were successful, but we weren't like wildly successful.
Right.
We had to keep working. And at some point, it just doesn't seem as much fun to go into the same old clubs and do it over and over and over. You want something a little different. Now, again, part of that is just the essence of being young and youthful and dissatisfied, right? Not knowing anything,
Yeah.
But Steve, again, he was just always such a consummate musician, and Rod the same way, and T, and Alan also at the time was, he was the first violinist, and he just kind of wanted a normal life too, I think. So he went off and got his medical degree, and Mark O'Connor was in the band for a little bit, and Mark was always like, some of these guys are just like, I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm me, and I'm this is it.
Right.
Yeah. And they could pull it off.
Yeah. I just read an interesting quote from, he's kind of a popular actor now, J.K. Simmons, something like that. You've seen him in a lot of things, but anyway, he said for himself, he couldn't even think of anything else to do with his life than act.
Yeah.
He said, that's how I knew, because I absolutely had no other interests.
Right.
And even if I realized, man, this is really hard. I should find something else. I couldn't, and nothing came to me.
Right. Well, that's exactly how I was when we started the band and through the time that we had the band. What happened for me was right around the time I turned 30, I started to think of other things. You know, it's like, well, you know, why am I limiting myself?
Yeah.
You know, in a way.
So I know you think the Dregs music is straightforward or not weird, but it's very complex, very difficult.
I'll give it that for sure.
And certainly precise.
Yeah.
And it's definitely not pop music.
Right.
It's hardly blues, jazz, rock. It's a fusion of many different things.
Right.
To what level did you have to exert yourself and make it so it was reasonably accessible so you could make money? Was there anything like that?
Yeah, you know, the only thing we did was we were a live band. So we understood when we played how a crowd responded to our songs. So we would try and build it to a peak as we'd go through a show. We'd always have these, you know, we had kind of a formula to our albums. If you listen to them, there's, you know, there was always a couple of rockers. There's always this kind of Celtic bluegrassy thing in there. There's always this kind of like symphonic long form thing, you know, which I love all those things. They're great, you know. And so we had a way of kind of performing through that stuff. And so that was kind of manipulative, if you will. I mean, that's how we thought about that, right? But in terms of the actual music, I mean, you know, the only thing is we were trying to become more successful. You know, I won't say make more money. It was really more about just becoming more successful and trying to get to a different level. And so the only pressures we ever had were from the record company and people trying to help us in some weird way, right? So like Clive Davis, when we signed with Arista, you know, he had us in his office to talk about what we were doing. And he was a really weird guy. Have you ever seen him on TV? Do you know who he is?
Yeah, I can visualize him, but I don't know why I've seen him.
So he's, you know, one of these classic, you know, records producer, record company owner guys from back then who had, you know, a string of a gazillion people that he made super rich and famous. I think Whitney Houston was in that bunch too.
She was with the singer from Gentle Giant, actually.
Oh, Derek Shulman?
Yeah, Derek Shulman was her A&R guy.
Okay. So Clive used to be, he was one of these guys. So all I remember is going into his office and he was like, yeah, you know, it's really, you know, he was very kind of vague. And all he wanted to do was he played Jeff Beck's Wired for us. You know, he said, you should think about this, you know, and we didn't understand what he was saying. It's like, are you telling us to play that? You know, because, yeah, we like Jeff Beck, but that's not what we do.
Right.
You know? And so, you know, but at the same time, we're like, how come we're kind of stuck here? How do we get these people to do this thing? You know, we had done some tours with Santana and the Doobie Brothers. And so we had this idea, okay, let's get these things. Let's, you know, maybe these guys will do something with us. Yeah, they will. You know, they'll sing a couple of tunes. Okay, let's do some rock tunes with vocals and see if that does anything. That was about the extent of trying to manipulate, you know, our own success.
Right.
And, you know, that was the last album that we all did together. And it was called Industry Standard for a reason. Right?
Now that makes sense.
Yeah. You know, it's like, oh God, okay, people are telling us here, you know. So that was it. But we didn't really. I mean, we were ridiculous. You know, we had fun when we played.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and we always just felt like, well, if we do that and people like that and people do respond to that, that's what we're going to do. So it wasn't, you know, it wasn't like a plan.
Right. It was a thing that worked for a time.
Yeah, exactly.
That's cool.
I don't know any other way.
The most straightforward thing, I think, in your discography is Flap.
Mm-hmm.
Very blues rock standard kind of album. Your solo stuff is all over the map.
Yeah.
Could you go into how those things have both fit into who you are?
Yeah, sure. Well, again, I I'm kind of a fan of music, and the Dregs were kind of a variety act in the sense that I just talked about, right? Yeah. It's like we had this kind of thing and this kind of thing, and we'd sort of walk you through those things, in a show. Flap was more, the idea was really, can we do some sort of bluesy improvisational music that, has some kind of coherence, because obviously the people in that group could play. I mean, they're all, professional musicians and years of experience and this kind of stuff. And, with that thing, it was fun because it was just kind of like when we would play together, we just had fun again. It's like it gelled. It was, it's hard to explain this stuff because unless you're playing parts, or you're playing like a rock band, it's really, there's a lot of feeling there, and there's a lot of this kind of, again, cerebral connection. It's hard to explain, but...
Well, it's not something to be captured on a disc. It's something to be experienced in a live
and
setting.
I wonder, I do wonder about this stuff. I wonder if it's, because I don't really like these kind of mystical explanations, but I don't, there really isn't a lot of words or science behind it. It's just, you just sort of do it.
Right.
So that was really intended as a live thing. I mean, I'd played with Joaquin for many years in this band Zazen, which was more electronic and kind of, fusion-y. And he knew Hillary and said, let's try and jam. And when we jammed with Hillary, I was like, wow, this is great. She's another one of these kind of drummers that's just like so fluid and powerful, So that was kind of cool.
What about Rama 2?
Yeah, so, well, okay. I think I told you I have, dozens of unfinished pieces that I'm really just waiting for the time to be able to do them, and I plan on it. It's getting close, which is great because
awesome.
I had sort of given up on it for a while just because the time is just work takes so much out of you. We talked about this a little bit. So I can see that happening in a year or two, kind of thing, just getting more back into creating more music. And, there's also this part of me which goes, do we really need more notes? I mean.
But it's for you.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like and I'm like, well, I still want to do it for some reason, so what the heck? And it'd be great if people listen to it. So I have this kind of weird, naive belief that there's a reason to do it. The way that other album came about was just the same kind of thing. I've been working with sequencers and tapes forever. I for a while after I learned how to program, I thought, no, maybe I should get into this music stuff. It was funny when Carl had mentioned the Atari ST. That was another computer I had. I learned how to program on that. I got a job with this company out of LA that was doing one of the first hard disk recording systems, and I can't remember the name of them. I'd have to look it up, but the soundbite there is I did all this work on this thing, and there were a couple of guys that were brilliant. I mean, they were like DSP guys, math guys that really understood this stuff, and they
deep stuff.
Yeah, and they knew a lot about operating systems, and they were all musicians, of course, but they had all this whole thing. And of course, there was some guy who was like the business guy, and I remember doing all this work and then going in to get a paycheck, and the guy said, "Yeah, come down, I'll meet you on Thursday," and he wouldn't be there. You know, he just wouldn't be there, and I'd be like, what? You know, and then finally, you know, they got about like a month behind paying me, and then every now and again a check would come, and then I was like, what the hell? You know, it's like this is worse than the music business. You know, it's just all this stuff, and honestly, since then, I just remember having this very conscious thought, because the guys who were writing this stuff were so creative and cool.
Yeah.
And you know, the Atari at that time, and you had Cubase. It wasn't, I think it was even called Cubase then. But there were a handful of sequencers coming out. Digital Performer was just starting on the Mac, you know, and it was just like so much cool stuff and so much creative stuff, but like no money. Right. You know, so people were, again, now you had engineers who are behaving like musicians. You know, they just love what they're doing, so they just do it. Right. You know, much respect for that, but at that point in my life, I was like, I thought I wanted to make a living. You know,
this is not the promise I was looking for.
Exactly. So then I started doing all this boring business stuff. But
So in terms of composition, I think a lot about that Rama album.
Yeah,
it's very diverse. There's some very complex melody, chord structure.
Right.
You've got amazing musicians on it.
Yep.
But when I think back to the songs, I think, kind of like what you were saying earlier, how did he think like that?
Yeah.
So do you start with a melody? Do you start? You mentioned that you'll hear a sound, or something will come out of your fingers.
Yeah. So I mean, just to kind of walk through those things, there was the stuff that has a lot of notes in the bass were just bass lines that just came out, right? It's just like I was just playing and I would find something. And usually what I would do is I would get that programmed into the computer, so I would have it there. And then I would start to layer things onto it. A lot of those songs got almost done for a long time, and then finally I was talking to Mike Keneally. I said, you got to help me come and finish these things, because I'm not finishing anything.
Right.
You know, he came to my house for 5 days and kind of like, okay, yeah, that's great. And he, you know, I had all these things that were just kind of almost there completely. And, you know, where it needed an additional overlay of a melody and I didn't have one, he would throw it on there. Okay. But a lot of that stuff I did have. So the things with the real thumpy bass lines were bass oriented. The weirder sort of sax things and all that, they came from sounds. You know, I'd be playing around with sounds in the synth, and they would just start to, you know, oh, I love the way this sounds.
Right.
You know, and what kind of melodies. Because every sound you play, I don't know how much you play synthesizer, but every sound that I play, I immediately will play some melody or chord around it. It just comes out.
For me, I'll flip through all the patches and go, oh, I could do something with that.
Yeah.
It's more about the potential. I don't actually create something, but I know something's there.
Yeah.
You'll hear a sound and go, nope, doesn't strike anything with me. And then, oh, that definitely, there's an idea there.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of that is that sound discovery stuff.
Okay.
And
it's primarily in the computer? Do you primarily compose on Logic now?
Yeah. And I also like a 6-string bass for writing.
Right.
It's just, you know, I can always come up with chords and lines and things that you can layer stuff on. It's not hard to write music for me.
So I try to wrap these interviews up with, somebody were to say to you, hey, you were a musician and you did it. I like to write music that people don't listen to. You know, what would you say to somebody? You know, mostly it's a question of my own because that's my scenario. But if I were interested in being a full-time musician, would you recommend to that person they do it, they follow their passion, or you know what, you really should be more pragmatic and find something that'll make you money? How do you approach those kinds of questions?
Well, so being a human being is complicated.
Yeah.
Right? And I've certainly had my own fair share of dysfunction in my life, you know. But you know, I think that people can fool themselves into a misguided sense of passion, which is actually kind of running away from responsibility, you know. So on the other hand, you know, sometimes those people really luck up and make it. You know, they end up making a living doing whatever it is. And, you know, you can't talk to a musician who has made a living who doesn't say, I always knew I was going to do this. Yeah. Or, you know, it's like, you know, but, you know, there's a certain amount of luck involved. So, you know, I think it's really hard to make a living now doing music. So I generally tell people, if anyone ever bothers to ask, you know, especially when you're young, you got tons of energy. I mean, I used to work and then we talked about this and then go play music all night, you know. It's like, why not, right?
Right.
Then you can get some time to figure it out, figure out what's important to you, you know.
Yeah.
So, but there's lots of tools, there's lots of cool stuff. The hardest thing is finding other people who think like you to be around and work with if you want to.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have any recent recommendations or discoveries of music?
Well, you know, that's, you know, I find myself actually drawn to this kind of like, it's almost like I like ambient music now, you know, but there's so many labels and people that do this stuff. But just the other day I was gone into, I can't remember if I was on VLC or iTunes, but there's like, you know, internet radio, right? And by classification or category, you know, you can always discover stuff if you sit down and just go through some of those things and hear things. You know, and there's always incredible things. I mean, I don't have, you know, for fear of putting any undue focus on one thing for the 5 people who are going to hear it at this point, you know, I kind of feel like, yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff out there, but I don't even have time to listen or explore everything, you know, so.
Well, your recommendation for Avishai Cohen, game changer for me.
Yeah.
So I thank you for that.
No, that's cool. Yeah, if there's anything of that caliber, I'll be sure and let you know.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for all your time, and I really appreciate you coming to my living room and dealing with all of this.
You know, I know it's fun. Well, you know, to me, it's kind of an inspiration to meet someone who is just pursuing this kind of thing, you know, or thought or line in your own life. I mean, you've got a dual life going on. It's hard to, I mean, do it while you can.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I applaud you for it. So.
Oh, thank you.
So thanks. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Andy.
Sure. Thank you. See you then.